Hollywood has never been shy about improving on nature, and when it comes to dinosaurs, the pattern is almost always the same. Take the real animal, make it bigger, make it faster, give it thicker armour and a louder roar, and send it after the cast. Nearly every prehistoric creature that has ever appeared on screen has been dialed up. Except one. There is exactly one famous dinosaur that Hollywood made less frightening than it actually was. A dinosaur they shrank, softened, and turned into a gimmick, when the real animal was one of the first true kings of the Jurassic and the largest thing walking anywhere in its world. This is Dilophosaurus, and I'd like to introduce you to the real one. Now, most people met this animal in 1993 in Jurassic Park. The little dinosaur that flares a frill, spits venom, and takes down the greedy computer programmer in the rain. It's a wonderful scene. It's also almost entirely fiction. And the real animal had been sitting in the scientific record for over 50 years before that film was ever made. Its story begins in 1940 in northern Arizona, when a Navajo man named Jesse Williams came across the bones of a large dinosaur eroding out of the rock of what we now call the Kayenta Formation. He led paleontologists to the site, and what came out was remarkable. 3 specimens, including one that was nearly complete, making it one of the best preserved theropods known at the time. But paleontology was young, and mistakes were made. The team looked at these bones and concluded they'd found a new species of Megalosaurus, a catch-all bin for large meat-eating dinosaurs at the time. And that label stuck for 2 full decades, until another specimen turned up in the same area, in even better condition. And this one had a more complete skull. And on that skull was something nobody had seen. A thin, bony crest sitting just off the midline, which meant that in life there had been 2 of them. A pair of tall crests running along the top of the head. This was no Megalosaurus. And so it was finally given the name we know today, Dilophosaurus, the 2-crested lizard. And that specimen mattered for another reason. It was the largest individual ever found, and it still holds that record. A fully mature adult, roughly 23 feet from snout to tail. Its skeleton was hollow and lightly built, so it wasn't heavy for its length, around 880 pounds, about the weight of a brown bear. But 23 feet is 23 feet. And here's what matters. That made Dilophosaurus the largest land animal in all of North America during the early Jurassic, the undisputed apex predator of its world. Now compare that to the movie. The Jurassic Park version stands about waist high, because the filmmakers deliberately shrank it so audiences wouldn't confuse it with the raptors. And that single creative decision has done more damage to this animal's reputation than anything else, because millions of people now think Dilophosaurus was a small, sneaky little thing. It was the biggest animal in its entire ecosystem. And the frill? Almost certainly invented, likely inspired by the modern frilled lizard. But it did have those 2 crests, and they're genuinely fascinating. They were made of very thin bone, running from the snout back past the eye, and in life they'd have been covered in a layer of keratin, which means we don't actually know their true shape. For a while, people thought they were for cooling the animal down, or even for use as a battering ram. Both ideas are now out. The crests were far too fragile for combat. The consensus today is that they were for display, individual recognition, or attracting a mate, because they varied wildly from one animal to the next. Every Dilophosaurus had its own face, so it didn't have a frill and it didn't spit venom. But what it did have was frankly worse. Start with the jaws. The skull was proportionally enormous, sometimes accounting for around 10% of the animal's entire length, and it held about 30 teeth, each one long, curved, thin, and flattened side to side like a blade. And every tooth carried serrations, sometimes over 70 of them, split between the front and back edges. Those aren't teeth for crushing, those are teeth for slicing, for opening an animal up and letting it bleed out. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. Because for decades, scientists thought Dilophosaurus couldn't actually use those jaws properly. There's a distinctive notch at the front of its snout, and the old interpretation was that this made the skull weak, that it would crack under pressure, which led to a rather sad picture of Dilophosaurus as a scavenger, delicately picking at carcasses, or, at best, a fish specialist, wading in the shallows. It even seemed to fit. Those front teeth interlock in a rosette pattern, a bit like the fish-eating spinosaurs, or a modern gharial. And then, in 2020, that whole picture was demolished. A comprehensive re-description by Adam Marsh and Timothy Rowe, a 100-page reassessment based on 5 Arizona specimens, found that the skull was nothing like as fragile as everyone assumed. That notch? The joint there was immobile, and the structure around it was far more robust than believed, reinforced internally with bony struts that anchored powerful jaw muscles. This was not a delicate fish picker. This was an animal built to clamp down on large, struggling prey and hold on. And they had the evidence to prove it. In the same quarry as a Dilophosaurus skeleton, they found the remains of Cerrasaurus, an early, long-necked plant-eater about half the size of Dilophosaurus, and its bones were scattered with large bite marks. There's an oval puncture on the shoulder blade. There's a hole punched through the shin bone, and those marks were far too big to have come from any other predator known in that environment. A follow-up paper concluded something even starker. Dilophosaurus had jaws strong enough to puncture bone. So this was an animal that hunted big prey, and its jaws weren't its only weapon. Its arms were long, unusually strong. The bones carried deep pits where powerful muscles and ligaments attached, and remarkably flexible, ending in 3 well-developed claws, the first of which was substantially larger than the others. Those arms were for grabbing, pinning prey in place, holding on while the jaws did their work, and slashing. And it was fast. That lightweight skeleton, those long, powerful legs, and something else, something you'd recognize from birds. Dilophosaurus had fleshy air sacs from its respiratory system that grew into its vertebrae, both strengthening and lightening the skeleton and allowing unidirectional airflow through its lungs, the same efficient one-way breathing system birds and crocodiles use today. That means more oxygen, a higher metabolism, and an active, energetic hunter. Not a lumbering scavenger, a pursuit predator. There's even a chance it hunted in packs, which comes from that very first discovery. 3 individuals found lying right next to each other. Though if it's true, paleontologists suspect 3 was about the ceiling, because in a world this sparse, you simply couldn't feed more of them. But I want to leave you with the detail that has stayed with me most, because it tells you what life was actually like for this animal. Dilophosaurus is notorious among paleontologists for one grim distinction. The original specimen has the highest number of damaged bones of any theropod ever found. 8 injured bones. The next worst theropod has 4, and the damage was concentrated in its arms. Bony tumours, stress fractures, torsions, deformities. Reconstructions suggest this individual couldn't properly use one of its arms and had to compensate with the other. And here's the fascinating part. A study of over 60 individuals found essentially no fractures in the legs and feet. All the damage is in the arms, which tells you exactly how this animal made its living. Those arms were doing the violent work, grappling with prey that fought back. This was one tough creature with an extraordinary tolerance for pain, dragging a broken arm through a brutal world. And it was a brutal world. Dilophosaurus lived around 193 million years ago, when Pangaea was still intact and the Earth was still recovering from the mass extinction that ended the Triassic. Life was thin on the ground. Its home was harsh and hot, with punishing dry seasons when sand dunes marched across the landscape, relieved only by an ancient body of water we call Lake Dixie, and by wet seasons when the rivers came back and the place bloomed like a desert oasis. And in all of that world, among the early crocodile relatives, the sharks and lungfish, the tiny early mammals, the first pterosaurs, nothing came close to it. Nothing matched its size, nothing matched its ferocity. Which is the real tragedy of the movie version. Hollywood took the first great king of the dinosaurs and turned it into a knee-high novelty with a party trick. And in doing so, they made the one dinosaur that never needed the help. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep looking up.